He told me, with a chilling finality, that I was dead to him. Those words were like a dagger, severing the bond one had nurtured with all my heart. I couldn't comprehend how the son I had raised, through sleepless nights and countless sacrifices, could so easily erase me from his life. One moment, we were discussing his future, and the next, I was cast aside, as if my love had meant nothing. But I wasn't going to let his rejection define me. I refused to be a victim of his cruelty. Instead, I would reclaim my power in a way that would make him realize the gravity of his choice. This is how I transformed my heartbreak into a legacy of hope, turning my pain into purpose. Before I dive deeper into my story, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I want to feel that connection. And if my journey resonates with you, consider subscribing. Your support fuels my strength to share my truth. Now, let's get into it. He told me, plain and cold, that I was dead to him. The words hit like a sudden winter storm, unexpected, harsh, and unforgiving. I hadn't even seen it coming, that final shattering blow from my own son, Daniel, the boy I had raised with all the love and care I could muster. One minute, we were talking about his upcoming job interview, and the next, he snapped, "You're dead to me, Dad. Don't call me again." Then he hung up. Just like that, after years of silence and distance, those words left a scar deeper than I ever imagined. I sat there, phone still in hand, staring at the blank screen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How could my own flesh and blood say something so cruel? Was it anger? Was it pain? Or was it the final curtain on a relationship that had been unraveling for years? The weight of his declaration pressed down on me, heavier than any grief I had known. It wasn't just a rejection, it was a death sentence for the bond we shared, a bond one thought was unbreakable. For years, Daniel and I had danced around our differences like wary strangers, the silence stretching wider with each missed call, each avoided holiday, each unspoken hurt. I remembered when he was a boy, his laughter filling the house, his eyes bright with hope and trust. Somewhere along the way, that connection had frayed, tangled up in misunderstandings, disappointments, and the inevitable distance life creates between parent and child. But never had I imagined that he would use the word, dead, as a weapon to sever us forever. The conversation replayed in my mind, every syllable sharp and stinging. "You're dead to me." Those 4 words echoed louder than any shout. And the finality in his voice, the cold certainty that there was no room left for forgiveness or reconciliation, was devastating. I felt like a ghost, invisible and erased from his life. It was as if all the years I had tried to be a good father, to guide and protect him, had been wiped away in an instant. I knew I had to sit with this pain, to let it wash over me in waves. At first, anger flared, brief and fierce. How dare he dismiss me so easily? How could he forget the sacrifices I made, the nights I stayed up worrying, the dreams I had for him? But beneath the anger was a deeper sorrow, a profound sense of loss that no amount of rage could heal. I was mourning not just the loss of my son's love, but the loss of the man I thought he would become, and the father-son relationship I had hoped to share in my later years. As the hours passed, I found myself wandering through memories, both joyful and painful. I remembered Daniel's first steps, his first words, the pride in his eyes when he graduated high school. I remembered the fights, the misunderstandings, the times we both said things we shouldn't have. But most of all, I remembered the long silences that grew between us, the phone calls I made that went unanswered, the holidays spent alone. The silence was deafening now. I realized that this moment, brutal as it was not the beginning of our estrangement. It was the culmination of years of distance and misunderstanding. Yet hearing those words out loud, feeling them land so completely, was a shock that unsettled every fiber of my being. I thought about calling him back, explaining, apologizing, trying to bridge the chasm. But the knot in my stomach tightened. What could I say that would undo the damage? How do you reach someone who has decided you no longer exist? I felt powerless, adrift in a storm of emotions, caught between hope and despair. Despite the pain, a small voice inside me whispered that I couldn't let this define me. I was more than the sum of my mistakes and regrets. I was still here, still breathing, still hoping for a way forward, even if that way was uncertain. But that hope was fragile, buried under the weight of rejection and the ache of a broken bond. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation again and again. I asked myself what had gone wrong, where the threads had come undone. Was it my fault? Could I have done more? The questions circled endlessly, unanswered and relentless. I also thought about the future, what it might hold if Daniel truly meant what he said. Would I spend my remaining years haunted by this wound? Or could I find a way to heal, to let go of the pain and live with the knowledge that some relationships, no matter how deeply cherished, might never be mended? The next morning, I found a quiet resolve settling over me. The hurt was raw, but beneath it was a determination to face whatever came next with dignity. I realized that this rupture, painful as it was, forced me to confront truths I had long avoided. It was a reckoning, a turning point. My son had declared me dead to him, but I was still alive. Still here. And I owed it to myself, to the memory of the father I had tried to be, to find a path through this darkness. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead would be lonely and uncertain. But I was determined not to be defined by his rejection. I began to understand that this moment was not just about loss, it was about choice. I could choose to be crushed by the weight of his words, or I could choose to rise above them. The decision was mine alone. In the days that followed, I wrestled with a storm of emotions, grief, anger, confusion, and reluctant acceptance. Each day brought new waves of pain and moments of clarity. I reached out to old friends, seeking comfort and perspective. I wrote in my journal, pouring out my heart in words that I couldn't say aloud. And slowly, the shock began to dull, replaced by a steely resolve. I knew I had to take control of my own story, to reclaim my sense of self beyond the fractured relationship with my son. But I also knew that this choice, this act of reclaiming, would come with consequences, both personal and legal. For now, though, I sat with the ache of those 4 devastating words. "You're dead to me." They marked the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. I was left to grapple with the silence and the void they left behind, and to find a way forward in the shadow of rejection. Days after Daniel's cold words echoed in my mind, the silence between us stretched like a chasm I wasn't sure I could cross. I kept replaying that phone call, the finality in his voice, the way he had severed our connection with a few simple, brutal words. It was as though the son I had known, loved, and raised was now a stranger, and I was left to grapple with the void he'd created. I spent long hours reflecting on the years that had led us here, trying to untangle the threads of blame and regret. It was a tangled web, moments of miscommunication, pride that neither of us wanted to relinquish, and wounds left unhealed. I remembered how Daniel had grown distant after his mother passed away, how I had tried to support him while wrestling with my own grief. We both carried pain, but neither had found the words or the courage to bridge the growing divide. I realized that this rejection wasn't born out of a sudden whim. It was the culmination of years of silence, disappointment, and unspoken hurt. Yet, even as I acknowledged that, the sting of being cast aside by my own son felt like a fresh wound. The ache was not just for the relationship lost but for the future that would never be. In the midst of this heartbreak, a quiet resolve began to take shape. I knew I couldn't remain passive, waiting for Daniel to reach out or for some miracle to restore what had been broken. This was my life and my legacy, and I had to take control. I couldn't allow his rejection to dictate the terms of my future. I began to consider the practical implications of what his words meant, not just emotionally, but legally. Daniel had been the primary beneficiary in my will, the one I had trusted to carry on my name and manage my affairs when I was gone. But now, with the relationship fractured beyond repair, I had to face the uncomfortable truth that I could no longer leave my estate in his hands. The thought was painful, but necessary. I started to research what it meant to remove someone from a will, how to ensure my assets would be distributed according to my wishes, and what legal hurdles might come with such a decision. The internet was both a blessing and a curse, offering information but also confronting me with harsh realities about family estrangement and the complexity of inheritance laws. I reached out to a family attorney, a stern but compassionate woman named Margaret, whom a friend had recommended. Our first meeting was sobering. Margaret listened patiently as I explained the situation, the emotional turmoil, and my desire to exclude Daniel from my will. She didn't judge, she simply laid out the facts and possible courses of action. "You have every right to revise your will as you see fit," she told me. "But you need to be very clear and precise in how you do it. Ambiguities can lead to challenges, especially from disinherited heirs." Her words underscored the seriousness of what I was about to undertake. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about sending a message, about reclaiming control over my story and my legacy. It was about setting boundaries with someone who had declared me dead to him. Margaret helped me understand the legal framework, how to draft a new will that explicitly excluded Daniel, how to appoint alternate beneficiaries, and how to protect my estate from potential disputes. We discussed trusts, charitable donations, and the importance of clear documentation. It was overwhelming, but empowering at the same time. As we spoke, I felt a shift within me. The pain of rejection was still raw, but a new determination was rising. I was no longer just a man hurt by his son's words. I was a father taking charge of his future, refusing to be defined by abandonment. Over the next few weeks, I delved into the process with a mixture of meticulous care and quiet defiance. I began drafting a new will, carefully considering who would receive my assets. It was a painful exercise, each name a reminder of what I had lost or what I hoped to preserve. Friends who had stood by me, charities that supported causes close to my heart, and even distant relatives who had shown kindness, all were considered. I found myself drawn to the idea of donating part of my estate to organizations that help families heal, or that supported fathers and sons struggling to connect. It felt like a way to transform my personal pain into something meaningful, a legacy that might prevent others from experiencing the same heartbreak. But the decision to exclude Daniel was not made lightly. There were moments when doubt crept in, when the memories of better times softened my resolve. I thought about the boy he had been, the man he might still become, and whether there was any hope for reconciliation. Yet, the finality of his words, and the way he had shut me out, reminded me that I had to protect myself first. I knew this choice would carry emotional consequences. Family gatherings would be strained, conversations awkward or avoided altogether. The news would ripple through our circle, eliciting judgments and perhaps even pity. But I was prepared to face the fallout. This was about more than inheritance. It was about dignity, respect, and the right to make decisions that honored my well-being. As I finalized the new will with Margaret, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for the relationship that had died, for the dreams unfulfilled, and for the father-son bond severed. Relief in the knowledge that I was no longer powerless, that I had reclaimed agency over my life and my legacy. I also realized this was a message I needed to send, not just to Daniel, but to myself and to the world. By removing him from my will, I was drawing a line, saying that rejection and cruelty had consequences. It was a painful boundary, but one I had to set to protect my dignity. At the same time, I held on to a fragile hope that someday, somehow, bridges might be rebuilt. This decision was not an act of hatred but of self-preservation. I wanted Daniel to know that while I was hurt and disappointed, I was not beyond hope. If he ever chose to reach out, to acknowledge the pain and seek healing, I was willing to listen. For now, though, I had to live with the reality of his rejection and my response to it. I had taken a painful but necessary step, asserting control over my legacy in the face of loss. It was a turning point, a moment when I moved from being a passive victim of estrangement to an active architect of my future. As I looked ahead, I knew the path would be difficult. There would be days of loneliness and regret, moments when I questioned my choices. But I was determined to face them with honesty and courage. This was my story now, and I would write the next chapter on my terms. I tucked the new will safely away, a symbol of my resolve and my hope for a future where dignity and respect could coexist with the scars of the past. Daniel's words had left me reeling, but they had also sparked a transformation. I was choosing not to wait for healing to come from him but to carve out my own peace, my own legacy, and my own sense of purpose. After I made the decision to remove Daniel from my will, I knew I couldn't proceed blindly. The legal landscape around inheritance was complicated, and I needed to understand exactly what I was stepping into. The thought of my son contesting the will, or the family fracturing further, loomed heavy in my mind. I had to be sure that my wishes would hold up and that the process would be as smooth as possible. Margaret, the attorney I had consulted earlier, became my guide through this maze. I scheduled another meeting with her, determined to grasp every nuance and prepare myself for what was ahead. She welcomed me with her usual calm professionalism, and as we sat down, I laid out my concerns and questions. "What happens if Daniel challenges the will?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady but betraying the anxiety I felt. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "It's a possibility you have to be prepared for. Disinherited heirs sometimes contest wills, especially if they feel wronged. But if your new will is clear, properly witnessed, and you've documented your reasons, it strengthens your position significantly." She explained the importance of clarity and precision in the legal documents. Ambiguous language could open the door to disputes, but a well-crafted will could limit that risk. She also advised me to keep a record of my decision-making process, not to justify myself to others, but to have a clear timeline and rationale if the will were ever questioned. I listened intently as she outlined the steps I needed to take: drafting the new will, ensuring it complied with state laws, having it properly witnessed, and safely storing the original document. She also mentioned codicils, legal amendments to existing wills, but recommended a complete rewrite in my case, to avoid confusion. Margaret's words gave me a roadmap, but she was also candid about the emotional toll this process could take. "Family disputes over wills can be messy," she said gently. "You may face backlash, strained relationships, and difficult conversations. But you have the right to control your estate and how it's distributed." That right felt like a lifeline, a way to reclaim control in a situation where I had felt powerless for so long. I realized this wasn't just about property or money, it was about dignity, respect, and setting boundaries. I left her office with a folder full of information and a sense of purpose. The next step was to begin drafting the new will. Margaret recommended an experienced estate planner who could help me articulate my wishes clearly and legally. I made an appointment with her, eager to move forward. Sitting with the estate planner, I found myself opening up about more than just assets. We talked about the values I wanted to uphold, the legacy I hoped to leave, and the message I wanted my decisions to send. It was a cathartic experience, transforming my grief and anger into something tangible and constructive. Together, we crafted a will that explicitly excluded Daniel, naming alternate beneficiaries and charitable organizations that reflected my beliefs and hopes for the future. We wrote clear clauses to prevent misunderstandings and provided detailed instructions for the distribution of my estate. Throughout the process, I kept Margaret informed, ensuring that every legal box was checked. We discussed the possibility of setting up trusts to protect the assets and reduce the chance of disputes. I also considered appointing a trusted executor, someone impartial and capable of managing the estate according to my wishes. As the draft took shape, I felt a mix of emotions. There was sorrow in formalizing my son's exclusion, but also relief in taking control of my legacy. The act of putting pen to paper was a powerful affirmation that I was no longer a passive victim of estrangement, but an active participant in shaping my future. I also thought about how this decision would ripple through my family and friends. I knew some would understand, others would question, and a few might condemn me. But I had to be prepared to stand firm, to explain if necessary, or remain silent if the situation demanded it. One afternoon, as I reviewed the final draft, I felt a quiet sense of closure. The will was more than a legal document, it was a testament to my journey through pain, resilience, and hope. It was an assertion that while my relationship with Daniel had faltered, my life and legacy were still mine to define. Before signing, Margaret advised me to notify the witnesses and ensure they were fully aware of the importance of their role. The signing ceremony was a solemn occasion, witnessed by two close friends who understood the gravity of the moment. Their presence gave me comfort, a reminder that I was not alone. After the will was signed and notarized, I stored the original in a secure location and gave copies to Margaret and the executor. I felt a weight lifted, knowing that my wishes were documented and protected. Despite the legal preparations, a part of me remained unsettled. I grappled with the potential fallout. Would Daniel contest the will? Would this decision sever our bond forever? The uncertainty was a constant companion. Yet I reminded myself that this was a necessary step in reclaiming my dignity and safeguarding my future. I could not control Daniel's choices or reactions, but I could control how I responded. In the weeks that followed, I began to share parts of my decision with close family members and trusted friends. Their reactions varied, some expressed support, others concern, and a few were silent. Each conversation was delicate, a balance between honesty and discretion. Through it all, I remained resolute. This was not a decision made in anger or spite, but one born from years of heartbreak and the need to protect myself. I was determined that my legacy would reflect my values and my hopes, not the fractures of past pain. I also started to think about ways to honor the relationship I had lost, even as I distanced myself legally. I considered writing letters to Daniel, not to send, but to express my feelings and perhaps find some peace within myself. The act of putting my thoughts into words was healing in itself. As the legal process settled into place, I found moments of calm amidst the storm. I realized that while I couldn't change the past or force reconciliation, I could shape my future with intention and clarity. This journey through legal consultation and will preparation was more than paperwork. It was a path toward reclaiming my identity and agency. It was a declaration that despite rejection, I remained whole and capable of making choices that honored my life and values. Though the road ahead was uncertain, I was ready to face it with courage. The legal steps I had taken were a foundation, a framework upon which I could build a future defined not by loss, but by strength and resolve. Some nights, the weight of my decision pressed down on me with suffocating force. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ache of loneliness settle deep into my bones. The choice to remove Daniel from my will was clear in my mind, but the emotional toll was harder to bear than I had anticipated. Sadness, anger, and regret twisted within me like an unrelenting storm, each emotion surfacing at unexpected moments. I found myself caught in a relentless tug-of-war between the hope for reconciliation and the harsh reality of rejection. The memories of Daniel's childhood flooded my thoughts, his small hands gripping mine, the sparkle in his eyes when he learned to ride a bike, the warmth of his laughter echoing through the house. Those moments were treasures I had clung to, but now they belonged to a past that felt increasingly distant. I recalled the arguments that had chipped away at our bond, the heated words exchanged during his teenage years, the misunderstandings that neither of us had the courage to resolve. I remembered the times I had tried to reach out, only to be met with silence or cold dismissal. These memories haunted me, reminders of wounds left to fester and grow. One evening, in the quiet of my study, I found an old photo album tucked away on a forgotten shelf. The pictures captured a timeline of our lives: birthdays, family vacations, school plays. I ran my fingers over the worn pages, a bittersweet smile crossing my lips. Each image was a testament to the love I had poured into being a father, and yet, the present was a stark contrast to those joyful days. Tears welled up as I grappled with the complexity of my feelings. I was angry that Daniel had rejected me so completely, that he had chosen to erase me from his life. Yet beneath the anger was a profound sadness, a mourning for the relationship that had slipped through my fingers. I felt regret, too, not for what I had done, but for what I hadn't done, for the chances missed and the words left unsaid. Despite the turmoil, I remained resolute. I knew that holding on to bitterness would only deepen the wound. I wanted to find a way to live with this pain without letting it consume me. It was a delicate balance, acknowledging the hurt while refusing to be defined by it. I sought solace in quiet routines. Early morning walks became a refuge, a time to clear my mind and breathe in the fresh air. I found comfort in journaling, pouring my thoughts onto paper when speaking aloud felt too vulnerable. Writing letters to Daniel, even though I never sent them, helped me articulate feelings I struggled to express. Flashbacks often caught me off guard. I'd be doing something ordinary, a cup of tea, a glance at the empty chair at the dinner table, and suddenly be transported to a memory of Daniel. Sometimes it was joyful, like his first day of school; other times, painful, like the last argument we had before the silence settled. These moments were raw and unfiltered, reminders of the depth of our broken connection. Friends noticed the change in me. Some offered gentle words of support, others gave space, unsure how to navigate my grief. I appreciated their presence, even when I couldn't find the words to explain what I was going through. Their quiet companionship was a balm during the darkest nights. I also wrestled with guilt, a persistent, gnawing feeling that perhaps I had failed as a father. Questions plagued me. Had I been too strict? Too absent? Had I missed signs of his pain? I knew that relationships were never one-sided, but the burden of responsibility weighed heavily. Yet, with time, I began to forgive myself, understanding that some fractures run too deep for any one person to mend alone. Through this emotional journey, I began to see the complexity of cutting ties. It wasn't a simple act of severing a bond, it was a profound loss layered with hope, anger, love, and despair. I mourned not only the relationship but also the possibility of what it might have been. In the quiet moments, I allowed myself to dream of a future where healing might be possible, where Daniel and I could find common ground again. But I also recognized that hope needed to be tempered with reality. I couldn't wait indefinitely for change that might never come. This duality, hope and resignation, became a constant companion. I learned to hold both without letting either consume me. It was a fragile equilibrium, but it kept me moving forward. I also reflected on the nature of family and forgiveness. Could I forgive Daniel for his rejection? Could I forgive myself for my perceived shortcomings? These questions didn't have easy answers, but wrestling with them was part of my journey toward inner peace. The decision to exclude Daniel from my will weighed heavily on my heart, but I knew it was necessary to protect my dignity and my legacy. I wanted to make it clear that while I still loved my son, I would not allow myself to be diminished by his rejection. It was a painful boundary, one I hoped he might someday understand. I began to prepare myself for the conversations that lay ahead. Informing other family members, close friends, and perhaps even Daniel himself, would require courage and honesty. I imagined the range of reactions: support, confusion, anger, and braced myself to navigate them with grace. In those moments of reflection, I realized that this was not just about loss, it was about strength. Strength to face rejection, to set limits, and to honor my own worth. It was about reclaiming my narrative in the face of pain. I also found solace in the knowledge that my story was not unique. Many parents endure fractured relationships with their children, carrying silent burdens of sorrow and hope. Connecting with support groups and others who had walked similar paths offered a sense of community and understanding. Through all of this, I held on to the belief that healing, in whatever form it might take, was possible. Perhaps not in the way I had once imagined, but in ways that honored both our journeys. As the days turned into weeks, I felt a subtle shift within me, a quiet resilience growing stronger. The sadness remained, but it was tempered by acceptance. The anger softened into resolve. The regret transformed into lessons learned. I was no longer just a man shattered by rejection. I was a father navigating the complexities of love and loss, choosing to move forward with dignity and hope. Though the path was uncertain and the pain real, I was determined to live fully, to embrace the life I had and the legacy I would leave. This was my story now, a story of heartbreak and healing, of endings and beginnings intertwined. As I faced the reality of excluding Daniel from my will, a new question took hold: where should my estate go instead? It wasn't just about removing his name, it was about choosing the right hands to carry forward what I had built and believed in. This was more than a financial decision, it was a reflection of my values, my hopes, and the legacy I wanted to leave behind. I began researching charities and organizations, wanting to find causes that resonated deeply with me. I wanted my assets to support work that could make a real difference, perhaps even prevent other families from experiencing the pain I had endured. The process felt like reclaiming a part of myself, turning personal loss into purpose. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, jotting down names and missions of various charities. There were many that focused on family support, mental health, and conflict resolution, areas that echoed my own struggles. I was drawn to organizations that help fathers and sons rebuild relationships, offering counseling and mediation. It felt symbolic, almost like planting seeds of hope where my own relationship had faltered. I also considered causes that honored my late wife's passions, animal welfare and education. She had always believed in giving back, and including charities she cared about felt like a way to keep her spirit alive. Selecting these organizations became an act of healing, weaving threads of love and remembrance into the fabric of my legacy. Reaching out to some of these charities, I spoke with coordinators who shared stories of the impact their work had on families and communities. Their dedication inspired me and strengthened my resolve. I realized that my decision to donate in Daniel's name could carry a message of forgiveness and hope, a way to acknowledge our fractured bond while supporting a greater good. Yet the task was not without emotional complexity. Choosing to give away what I had intended for my son was bittersweet. Each selection was a reminder of what I was relinquishing, but also of what I hoped to create. It was a delicate balance between loss and generosity. I thought carefully about the amounts to allocate, wanting to ensure each organization could benefit meaningfully while respecting the overall scope of my estate. With Margaret's guidance, I structured the will to specify these donations clearly, leaving no room for ambiguity. In conversations with close friends, I shared my plans and the reasons behind them. Their support was invaluable, offering encouragement and perspective. Some expressed admiration for turning personal pain into philanthropy. Others cautioned about potential misunderstandings. But I stood firm, knowing this was the path I needed to take. The act of donating in Daniel's name felt like a bridge, complex and fragile, but a symbol of my enduring love despite rejection. It was a way to honor him, even if our relationship could not be repaired in this life. I hoped that someday he might see it as a gesture of forgiveness rather than resentment. As the will took shape, I included letters addressed to the charities, explaining the personal significance of the gifts and my hope that they would use the funds to support healing and connection. Writing these letters was deeply moving, allowing me to express what I could not say directly to Daniel. I also prepared a personal letter, not intended for Daniel but for myself, a reminder of why I had made these choices and what I hoped they would achieve. It was a message of hope, resilience, and the power of turning pain into purpose. In selecting beneficiaries, I balanced practicality with emotion. I wanted to ensure that the charities could manage the donations effectively, so I prioritized well-established organizations with strong track records. At the same time, I reserved a portion for smaller, local groups that had touched my life and community. The process was meticulous, requiring careful consideration and legal precision. Margaret reviewed each clause, ensuring that my intentions were clearly articulated and legally sound. We discussed contingencies in case any organization ceased operations or was unable to fulfill its mission. Amid these preparations, I felt a growing sense of peace. The act of choosing beneficiaries was a way to reclaim control over my story and to create a legacy that transcended personal pain. It was a testament to my belief in the possibility of healing and transformation. I also thought about how this decision might influence others in my family. Perhaps it would serve as a gentle nudge towards reconciliation, or at least reflection. Even if Daniel remained distant, I hoped that my choices would speak louder than words, conveying a message of love and forgiveness. In quiet moments, I imagined the impact these donations might have: families finding support, fathers and sons reconnecting, communities strengthened. It was a vision that gave me comfort and a renewed sense of purpose. As the final draft of the will incorporated these charitable gifts, I felt a profound sense of closure. The document was no longer just a legal instrument, it had become a narrative of hope and healing. It reflected the complexities of my journey, the heartbreak and the courage, the endings and the new beginnings. Throughout this process, I learned that legacy is about more than inheritance. It's about values, the imprint we leave on the lives of others, and the ways we choose to live despite adversity. By directing my estate towards causes that mattered to me, I was affirming my identity and my beliefs. The act of giving became a beacon in the darkness, a way to transform rejection into something meaningful. It was an expression of resilience, a refusal to let pain define me entirely. As I prepared to finalize these decisions with Margaret and the estate planner, I felt a quiet strength settle within me. This chapter of my life was marked not only by loss but by the intentional creation of something lasting and good. In making these choices, I reclaimed my narrative. I chose to define my legacy not by the fracture with my son but by the love and hope I continued to hold in my heart. I knew that once I finalized the new will, I couldn't keep the decision to exclude Daniel a secret forever. The truth would ripple through my family and friends, stirring reactions I was not entirely ready for but had to face. It was time to prepare myself, to communicate my choice clearly and stand firm in the face of whatever responses came my way. I began by confiding in my closest confidants, Sarah, my sister, and Michael, a longtime friend who had stood by me through my darkest moments. Their support was a balm, a reminder that I was not alone. I explained the reasons behind my decision, sharing the pain of Daniel's rejection and the necessity of protecting my dignity and legacy. Sarah listened quietly, her eyes moist but her voice steady. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "It takes courage to make such a hard choice." Michael nodded in agreement, adding, "You're doing what you have to do, for yourself and for your peace." Encouraged by their understanding, I began to reach out to other family members. Some were surprised, others sympathetic, and a few hesitant to wade into such a sensitive topic. I explained my decision with as much clarity and compassion as I could muster, emphasizing that it was not made lightly but out of self-preservation. One cousin, whom I had always considered close, expressed concern. "Are you sure this is the right path? Family bonds are complicated. Maybe there's still a way to mend things." I appreciated the concern, but I was firm. "I hope for healing someday," I replied. "But for now, I have to protect myself. This is about setting boundaries and preserving my dignity." Preparing for potential backlash, I braced myself for difficult conversations. I anticipated questions about my motivations, criticisms about excluding Daniel, and the inevitable speculation that would circulate. It was a daunting prospect, but I knew that transparency was important. When news of the will's changes reached some extended family members, reactions varied widely. Some expressed support, recognizing the pain I had endured. Others were more judgmental, questioning my decision or accusing me of giving up too soon. I tried to remain calm and measured, responding with honesty and without defensiveness. In one particularly tense phone call, a relative accused me of being too harsh, saying, "You're burning bridges that might never be rebuilt." I took a steadying breath. "I understand why you feel that way," I said. "But this is about protecting myself after years of rejection. It's not about burning bridges but about setting boundaries." These conversations were emotionally exhausting, but they also reinforced my resolve. I realized that not everyone would understand, and that was okay. What mattered was that I was clear and true to myself. I also thought carefully about how to communicate with Daniel, though I knew this would be the hardest conversation, if it happened at all. I drafted a letter, explaining my decision with honesty and compassion. I wanted him to know that despite his rejection, I still loved him and hoped for reconciliation someday, but that I could no longer leave my estate in his hands. Whether I would send that letter remained uncertain. It was a gesture of closure for myself as much as for him, a way to express feelings that had long been bottled up. In the meantime, I shared my decision with a few trusted friends outside the family circle. Their perspectives helped me process the emotional complexity and reinforced that setting boundaries was an act of self-respect, not spite. As the news spread, I sensed a shift in family dynamics. Some conversations became more guarded, others more open. I chose to engage when I felt it was constructive and to step back when emotions ran too high. Throughout this process, I learned to navigate the delicate balance between standing firm and remaining open to dialogue. I was clear about my boundaries but also expressed willingness to listen if Daniel or others wanted to talk. One surprising moment came when a distant relative reached out privately, sharing their own experience with estrangement and offering words of empathy. It was a reminder that pain and family fractures are often more common than we admit. Despite the challenges, I found strength in the clarity of my decision. Communicating it was difficult, but it also freed me from the burden of silence and secrecy. I was no longer carrying this alone. I also reflected on the importance of community during this time. The support of friends and family who understood my journey became a vital source of comfort. Their presence reminded me that while one relationship had ended, others remained strong and nurturing. At times I grappled with feelings of guilt and doubt, wondering if I had done the right thing. But each conversation, each expression of support, helped reaffirm that protecting myself was necessary. I realized that communicating my decision was not just about informing others, it was about reclaiming my voice. For too long, I had been silenced by rejection and pain. Now I was speaking my truth, setting the terms of my story. As I moved forward, I prepared myself for whatever lay ahead, whether that meant further estrangement, tentative reconciliation, or a new chapter of understanding and acceptance. I knew the road would be complex, but I was no longer afraid. My choice to share my decision was an act of courage and clarity, a declaration that I was ready to live authentically, regardless of others' reactions. In this process, I found a renewed sense of peace. The burden of secrecy lifted, replaced by a quiet confidence that comes from owning one's truth. Though the future remained uncertain, I felt grounded. I had communicated my boundaries, shared my reasons, and stood firm in my resolve. This chapter of my life was marked by honesty and strength, a testament to the power of speaking up, even when the words are hard to say. It was a step toward healing, not just for me, but perhaps, in time, for those I cared about most. The news of my decision finally reached Daniel, carried by whispers and direct conversations that no longer allowed silence to protect us. I wasn't sure how or when he found out, but one afternoon, my phone rang, and his name flashed on the screen. My heart pounded, hope and fear tangled in equal measure. I debated whether to answer, but the moment passed quickly. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened to the message. His voice was guarded, clipped. "Dad, I heard about the changes to your will. I don't know what to say. I'm hurt, confused, maybe angry. I guess you don't want me in your life anymore. I'm not sure if I can forgive that, or if I even want to right now. But I'm listening." His words echoed the complex emotions I'd been wrestling with for months. Hurt, confusion, anger, emotions I knew all too well. Yet beneath it was a hint of openness, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. It was fragile, but it was there. I called him back the next day. My voice trembled slightly, but I spoke with as much calm and honesty as I could muster. "Daniel, I never wanted to hurt you. This decision was about protecting myself after years of silence and rejection. I still love you, and I hope we can find a way forward, but I needed to set boundaries." There was silence on the other end, heavy and uncertain. Then he spoke, quieter this time. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive, or even understand. But maybe we can start talking." The conversation was brief, tentative, but it marked a shift, a moment where the distance between us seemed a little less vast. In the days that followed, Daniel's reactions continued to be a mixture of emotions. Sometimes he called to ask questions about the will, the charities, or my reasons. Other times, his messages were cold and distant, reflecting the hurt still simmering beneath the surface. I sensed that he was grappling with the reality of being excluded, a reality that forced him to confront our fractured relationship in ways he might have avoided before. His anger was a shield, his confusion a symptom of pain. At one point, Daniel sent a long email, expressing feelings of betrayal and abandonment. He wrote about the childhood wounds, the misunderstandings, and his own struggles to make sense of it all. Reading his words was like peeling back layers of a wound I thought had scabbed over. I responded with empathy, acknowledging his pain and reiterating my hope for healing. I didn't have all the answers, nor did I expect immediate reconciliation. But I wanted him to know that I was willing to listen, to understand, and to work toward a future where forgiveness might be possible. Some family members encouraged me to be patient, reminding me that healing takes time. Others warned that Daniel's anger might never subside, that the exclusion from the will could be a final fracture. Their words echoed my own fears, but I clung to the possibility of mending what was broken. The media, surprisingly, caught wind of the story. A local newspaper ran a piece about my decision and the complex emotions involved in estranged family relationships. The article brought a flood of public attention, messages of support from strangers who had faced similar situations, as well as criticism from those who questioned my choice. Daniel's reaction to the media coverage was mixed. At times, he seemed embarrassed or angry. Other times, he acknowledged the public conversation helped him see the broader context of our struggle. Throughout this turbulent time, I remained committed to transparency and openness. I shared updates with close friends and family, seeking their counsel and support. Their presence was a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone. I also sought professional guidance, engaging a counselor to help me navigate the emotional complexities of my relationship with Daniel. The sessions were challenging but invaluable, teaching me to manage expectations, communicate effectively, and hold space for both my pain and his. In one particularly poignant session, I realized that our relationship was not defined solely by rejection or forgiveness, but by a continuum of emotions, love, hurt, hope, and fear intertwined. Accepting this complexity allowed me to approach Daniel with greater compassion and patience. I sent Daniel a letter, not expecting a swift response, but as a gesture of goodwill and a record of my feelings. In it, I expressed my sorrow for the pain we had both endured, my hope for healing, and my commitment to being present if he chose to reach out. Weeks passed with sporadic contact, some days filled with cautious conversations, others marked by silence. Each interaction was a small step, fragile but significant. At times I wondered if the wounds were too deep to heal, if the chasm between us was insurmountable. But then, moments of connection, shared memories, tentative apologies, expressions of care, reminded me that hope remained. I learned to accept the uncertainty, to hold space for both progress and setbacks. I understood that reconciliation is not a single event but a process, often slow and nonlinear. While the decision to exclude Daniel from my will had caused pain, it also forced us to confront realities we had long avoided. It opened a dialogue, imperfect and difficult, but real. Through this journey, I discovered that love does not always look like harmony. Sometimes it's messy, complicated, and filled with struggle. But it remains love nonetheless. I remained patient, hopeful that in time, our relationship might find new footing. Until then, I held on to the belief that even fractured bonds could be mended, and that forgiveness, when it came, would be a gift earned through honesty and understanding. As I navigated this delicate terrain, I found strength in vulnerability and courage in hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to walk it, one step at a time, with an open heart. As the dust settled from the upheaval with Daniel, I found myself reflecting deeply on what legacy truly meant. It was no longer just about the assets, the will, or even the fragile hope of reconciliation. It was about something far more profound, the imprint I would leave behind, beyond blood ties and broken promises. I realized legacy isn't confined to inheritance. It's woven into the values we uphold, the kindness we show, and the impact we make on others' lives. It's about the stories we tell and the lessons we pass on, whether through family or community. In choosing to redirect my estate to charities and causes that resonated with my beliefs, I had begun crafting a legacy that transcended the fractures of my personal relationships. It was an act of transformation, turning the pain of estrangement into a force for good. I thought about the families these organizations supported, the fathers and sons who were fighting to heal wounds similar to mine. My donations weren't just financial, they were messages of hope, compassion, and the possibility of change. The symbolic gesture of donating in Daniel's name became a way to honor him without enabling hurt. It was a statement that love could persist even when relationships faltered, that disappointment didn't erase the bond entirely. This realization brought me a sense of peace. My legacy was no longer hostage to the bitterness of rejection or the uncertainty of forgiveness. It was alive in the work these charities would do, in the lives they would touch, and in the hope they would inspire. I began sharing my story publicly, speaking at community events and support groups about the complexities of family estrangement and the power of choosing one's legacy. My journey resonated with many, sparking conversations about forgiveness, boundaries, and healing. Through these engagements, I connected with others who had walked similar paths. Their stories enriched my understanding and reinforced the idea that legacy is a collective tapestry, woven from countless threads of human experience. I also found solace in writing letters, essays, and reflections that captured the nuances of my journey. Putting words to my feelings was healing, a way to process loss and articulate hope. In these writings, I grappled with the paradox of legacy, how it can be both a burden and a gift, a source of pain and a beacon of light. I explored the tension between holding on and letting go, between memory and moving forward. My story became a testament to resilience, the ability to find meaning amid heartbreak, to create something lasting from the fragments of fractured relationships. I reached out to the charities receiving my donations, forging connections that personalized my giving. Hearing firsthand about the impact of their work deepened my commitment and gave tangible form to my legacy. Each success story, each family healed, was a thread in the fabric I was weaving, a legacy of hope born from hardship. I also reflected on the broader implications of my journey. Family estrangement is often a silent suffering, cloaked in shame and misunderstanding. By speaking openly, I hope to break down stigma and encourage others to seek support and healing. I emphasize that legacy is not solely about material wealth but about the values and love we leave behind. It's about the courage to face difficult truths and the grace to choose compassion over resentment. In this way, my decision to exclude Daniel from my will was not an act of rejection but a complex expression of love, imperfect, painful, yet enduring. I found strength in knowing that legacy is fluid, evolving with time and experience. It's shaped by our actions and intentions, by how we respond to adversity and loss. This perspective allowed me to embrace my story fully, with all its contradictions and complexities. I was both the man who had been hurt and the man who chose to rise above it. As I continued to navigate my relationship with Daniel, I held on to the belief that legacy is ultimately about connection, whether through family, community, or shared humanity. It's a reminder that while we cannot control every outcome, we can choose how we respond, how we love, and how we leave our mark. In embracing this truth, I found a sense of purpose that transcended pain. My legacy was no longer defined by absence or rejection but by the enduring power of hope, kindness, and resilience. This journey transformed me from a man broken by loss into one who had reclaimed his story, his dignity, and his future. And in that transformation, I discovered that legacy is not just what we leave behind, it's how we live today. Once my will was finalized and the donations designated, I began to witness the tangible impact of my decision unfold in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. The charities I had chosen started to put the funds to work, supporting programs that help families heal, providing counseling to fathers and sons struggling to reconnect, and offering community resources that made a real difference in people's lives. I received letters and updates from the organizations, sharing stories of hope and transformation. One charity sent me a heartfelt note about a father and son who, after years of estrangement, found a path back to each other through their programs. Another shared how their family support workshops had helped dozens of people navigate difficult relationships with empathy and understanding. Reading these stories stirred a mix of emotions within me: pride, relief, and a deep sense of purpose. It was as if my pain had been alchemized into something healing, reaching beyond my own experience to touch others in need. The knowledge that my legacy was actively fostering connection and reconciliation brought me solace. It reminded me that while my relationship with Daniel remained complicated, I was contributing to a broader movement of healing and hope. I also began volunteering with some of the local organizations, offering my time and sharing my story to inspire others. Speaking at support groups and community events was both daunting and empowering. It allowed me to transform my personal journey into a beacon for others facing similar challenges. Through these engagements, I met countless individuals whose lives had been touched by family estrangement. Their stories echoed my own pain and resilience, weaving a tapestry of shared experience that underscored the universality of such struggles. These connections deepened my understanding of what it meant to build a legacy, not just through financial means, but through presence, compassion, and advocacy. Friends and family who once viewed my decision with skepticism began to see its positive ripple effects. They witnessed how my donations supported meaningful change and how my advocacy encouraged others to confront painful family dynamics with courage. This shift in perception strengthened my resolve. I realized that legacy is not static, it grows and evolves as it interacts with the world. At times, I reflected on how different things might have been if Daniel and I had found common ground earlier. Yet, I also understood that every person's journey is unique, and sometimes healing takes unexpected forms. The communities I engaged with reminded me that love and forgiveness are complex and often nonlinear. They taught me patience and the importance of celebrating small victories. In volunteering, I encountered young fathers grappling with their own fears of rejection, mothers striving to hold families together, and adult children seeking ways to reconnect. Their courage inspired me and reaffirmed my belief in the power of hope. I also found that sharing my story helped reduce the stigma around family estrangement. People began to speak more openly about their experiences, creating spaces for empathy and support. This collective healing underscored the idea that legacy is communal, a shared responsibility to nurture connections and build understanding. Through these efforts, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My journey, once marked by loss and isolation, had transformed into one of engagement and contribution. I continued to monitor the charity's progress, attending events and celebrating milestones. Each success story was a reminder that my decision had meaning beyond personal grief. At the same time, I remained mindful of the complexities involved. Not every relationship mended, not every heart healed. But even in the face of such realities, the work continued. I found peace in knowing that my legacy was not about perfection but about perseverance, the willingness to choose hope and action despite pain. This experience also taught me about the interconnectedness of human experience. One person's healing can ripple outward, touching lives in unforeseen ways. As I witnessed the tangible outcomes of my generosity and advocacy, I felt gratitude, not just for what I could give, but for the lessons I had learned along the way. My story, once defined by estrangement and rejection, had become a catalyst for change, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. I realized that legacy is living, breathing, and evolving. It's carried forward not just by what we leave behind, but by how we choose to engage with the world today. In embracing this truth, I found a deeper sense of fulfillment. The pain of the past remained, but it was woven into a richer tapestry of purpose and connection. Through my contributions and my voice, I was helping to build a future where families might find healing, understanding, and love. And in doing so, I was reclaiming my own dignity and forging a legacy that honored both the struggles and the triumphs of life. Looking back on the long, winding journey from rejection to resolution, I feel a mixture of emotions, sorrow, relief, and above all, a quiet strength. The path was far from easy, marked by heartbreak and difficult choices, but it led me to a place of peace I never thought possible. I have learned that family relationships are complex and layered, and sometimes love means setting boundaries as much as it means forgiveness. The decision to exclude Daniel from my will was the hardest I ever made. It felt like severing a part of myself, a painful acknowledgement that our bond had fractured beyond repair, at least for now. Yet, that choice also became a catalyst for reclaiming my dignity and asserting my right to protect myself. It was an act of courage, born out of years of silence and pain. I hold on to hope that one day, Daniel and I might bridge the divide that separates us. Healing is not linear, and people change. I am open to reconciliation if and when it comes, but I will no longer wait indefinitely at a closed door. My love for him remains, complicated and imperfect, but enduring. In the meantime, I have found solace in the legacy I have built beyond our relationship, in the charities supported, the stories shared, and the lives touched. My journey has become more than a personal struggle, it has grown into an advocacy for others facing similar challenges. Through speaking engagements and community work, I have connected with countless individuals who have walked a path of estrangement and found ways to heal. These experiences have taught me that legacy is not just about inheritance or blood ties, it is about the values we embody and the impact we leave on the world. It is about resilience, compassion, and the courage to face difficult truths. Reflecting on my journey, I see how pain and hope have intertwined, shaping me into someone stronger and more empathetic. I have learned to embrace vulnerability as a source of strength, and to hold both love and loss in my heart. Family relationships will always be complicated, filled with moments of joy and sorrow. But I have come to understand that my worth is not defined by others' acceptance or rejection. I am whole, deserving of dignity and respect. As I look forward, I carry a wish for healing, not just for Daniel and me, but for all families fractured by misunderstanding and pain. I hope that my story can inspire others to seek connection, to set boundaries when necessary, and to find peace amidst complexity. My journey continues, as does my commitment to living authentically and with purpose. I am no longer waiting for validation or reconciliation. I am living fully, embracing each day with gratitude and resolve. This story is not just mine, it belongs to anyone who has faced rejection, heartbreak, and the challenge of forging a path forward. It is a testament to the human spirit's capacity for endurance and transformation. In the end, I have learned that legacy is not something we passively inherit or leave behind. It is something we actively create through the choices we make and the love we hold, even when it is difficult. I stand here today, not as a man defeated by loss, but as one empowered by experience, hope, and the unyielding desire to live with integrity. Though the road has been rocky, I am at peace with where I have come from and where I am going. My story is still unfolding, shaped by resilience and the belief that healing is always possible. And so, I continue, living, loving, and building a legacy that honors both the past and the promise of the future.